Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Myself Parimala. I'm studying first semester Venkateshwara College of Engineering from Ferrari section. Today's subject is mathematics and the topic is polar coordinate and polar curves. Introduction to polar coordinate and polar curves. Polar coordinate system is a two-dimensional coordinate system where each point is defined by a distance from the origin and an angle from a reference direction. Polar curves and curves are that represent the using polar coordinates where the distance from the origin and the angle determine the position of each point. Polar coordinates are often used to describe circular, spiraling, or radial patterns. Here we can see the diagram where it is a perpendicular line where r is the radius and the height is the r sine theta, that is of y, and the distance of xy line is r cos theta. Polar coordinate representation. In polar coordinates, a point is represented as r, theta, where r is the distance from the origin and theta is the angle between the clockwise from the reference direction. The distance r is always a non-negative value and the angle theta is usually measured in radians. The reference direction is typically the positive x-axis, but it can be any fixed direction. Converting between polar and Cartesian coordinates. To convert from polar to Cartesian coordinates, we use the formulas x is equals to r, cos of theta is equals to y is equals to r, and sine of theta where x, y are the Cartesian coordinates. Here in the diagram we can see that rectangular coordinates of x, y is also the polar coordinates of r, theta. Polar curves and equations. Polar curves are represented by equations in polar form using in the form of r is equals to f of theta, where r represents the distance from the origin and theta represents the angle. Different polar equations produce different types of curves such as circles, cardioids, roses, and spirals. You can see in this diagram there are many polar equations and curves. A circle, cardioid, one loop, inner loop, limit curve, throws curve, that is even and odd, and Archimedes spiral. Polar equations often involve trigonometric functions like sine and cosine, as well as constants that determine the shape and scale of the curve. Graphing polar curves. To graph a polar curve, we plot points by evaluating the equation for different values of theta. We start by choosing a range of values for theta that covers a complete cycle of curve. Then we calculate the corresponding r values and plot the points in the polar coordinate system. Here you can see the diagram. This is one of the graphing of polar curve. And periodicity in polar curves. Here, many polar curves exhibit a symmetry such as symmetry about the origin, symmetry about the polar axis, symmetry about the polar angle. In this diagram, we can see the symmetrics where with respect to polar axis, with respect to pole, and with respect to vertical line. The periodicity of a polar curve is determined by the number of complete cycles it completes as theta varies. Understanding symmetry and periodicity helps in the visualizing and analyzing polar curves. Here the applications of polar curves. Polar curves have various applications in science and engineering such as modeling planetary orbits, describing electromagnetic fields, and analyzing fluid flow patterns. They are also used in art, architecture, and design to create aesthetical pleasing patterns and shapes. Polar curves provide a powerful mathematical tool for understanding and representing complex geometric phenomena. In this diagram, you can see the limicon with inner loop, heart-shaped, no inner loop, no special features. In this diagram, we can see the 4 types of polar curves. Here comes the conclusion, wherein polar coordinates and polar curves provide an alternative coordinate system for representing points and curves in a unique way. Understanding polar coordinates and polar curves expands our mathematical toolkit and allows us to explore a wide range of geometric patterns and phenomena. By mastering these concepts, we can gain insights into diverse fields and appreciate the beauty of mathematical representations. In this diagram, we can see there is a pole. From the pole to the distance of r, it is a p of r comma theta, and here it is a polar axis. From the pole, it is of theta is equals to 0. Here is of polar coordinates and polar curves. Thank you everyone.